A few weeks ago, Genshin Impact dropped a massive teaser trailer, like really huge, where they finally talked about the Three Moon Sisters. Now, if you've been playing the game for a while, you probably know that the Three Moon Sisters are a big deal. But here's the thing. Until now, they've never been directly mentioned by the game. We've only ever heard about them through books and world building quests. So this trailer, it's the first time the game has actually addressed them, at least as far as I know. If I'm wrong, please go ahead and call me out in the comments. Now, as always, when Genshin drops a trailer like this, the community goes wild with theories. But one theory stood out more than the rest. The idea that Paimon is somehow connected to the Three Moon Sisters, and that whatever is coming next will revolve around her. And this got me thinking, has Genshin actually done a good enough job of making Paimon this important? Like, is she really built up to the point where she should be tied to such a major event in the game? I mean, yeah, she's always there floating around talking her ears off, but has the game truly made her feel important enough for something like this? Or are people just latching into a theory because they want her to be more than, well, whatever she is right now? And that's what we're getting into today. But before we dive in, if you enjoy my content, make sure to like the video, drop a comment on whether you think Paimon is actually that important, and subscribe with notifications on so you don't miss out on any of my future videos. Alright, let's get into it. So in case you don't know who Paimon is, maybe you're not too familiar with Genshin Impact, Paimon is the traveler's companion, both in the story and mechanically. Story-wise, she is the traveler's guide. She's presumably the one who taught them the language spoken in Teyvat, and she's supposed to help direct them through different nations. Though let's be real, we don't actually see her doing much guiding beyond pointing out the obvious. Mechanically, she is the voice of the traveler. See, Genshin made a weird choice with the main character. They are both a voiced and a voiceless protagonist, meaning that for about 90% of the game, they don't speak. That's where Paimon comes in. She essentially fills in their dialogue, saying what they would say. Whether that's a good or bad decision, that's a whole other discussion, and trust me, I've got some thoughts on that, but that's for another video entirely. Now, because Paimon is such a central figure, there have been a ton of theories around her. Some people think she's secretly important to the game's lore, others think she's too important for no real reason. So if we're going to talk about Paimon and whether she should be tied to something as major as the Three Moon Sisters, we need to break it down into two things. First, her appearance. Is there anything visually significant about Paimon that suggests that she's connected to something bigger? Are there hints to her design that we've overlooked? And secondly, her journey, and this is a big one because we need to look at two things here. Everything that has happened that makes her seem important, and more importantly, everything that hasn't happened. Moments where she could have been built up as a major figure but wasn't. This part is crucial because if the game really wanted Paimon to be as big as the theory suggests, wouldn't there be more signs by now? And we'll get into that. So first up, let's talk about her appearance. Alright, so before we jump into Paimon's appearance, we need to take a quick step back and talk about the cutscene that kicks off all of Genshin Impact, the one with the unknown god. See, before the game even starts, we get this intro where the traveler and their siblings try to leave Teyvat. But before they can escape, they are stopped by this mysterious, all-powerful figure. She completely overwhelms them, traps their sibling, and sends the traveler crashing back into Teyvat. And that's where the whole adventure begins. Now, the key thing here is how the unknown god looks. She's a woman dressed in white with white hair. These are very distinct visual traits. Fast forward to when we wake up in Teyvat, and who do we meet? Paimon, a small white-haired, white-clothed girl with a very particular design. Naturally, this sparked a huge theory. Is Paimon a weakened version of the unknown god, or at least someone deeply connected to her? It's an interesting idea, but personally, I don't think that's the case. The unknown god literally calls herself the sustainer of heavenly principles. And from what we know so far, we are kind of fighting against the heavenly principles. So why would the one maintaining them also be guiding us? It just really doesn't add up. But if Paimon isn't the unknown god, then what is she? And that's where her appearance becomes really important. What about Paimon's design makes her stand out? What makes her more unique than every other life form in Teyvat? Alright, so let's start right from literally the very top. Paimon wears a crown, and not just any crown. It's completely unique because it doesn't just sit on her head, it literally floats above her. No other character in Genshin Impact has anything like this. It's a completely distinct trait that belongs only to Paimon. But here's the weird part. This crown is never directly referenced anywhere in the game. The only place we see anything similar is in the title of the game itself, and that's it. Nowhere else in Teyvat, no lore books, no NPC dialogue, nothing. Now if we look a bit lower, we see something even more interesting, Paimon's triquetra symbol. Now unlike the crown, this symbol pops up everywhere in Genshin Impact. It's all over the place, on menus, icons, in-game structures, you name it. But here's the key difference. Everywhere else, the triquetra is facing upwards, but on Paimon's clothing, it's inverted. This is very deliberate. There is clearly some kind of symbolic meaning behind this, something that sets her apart. Now, moving to her back, we get another interesting detail. Paimon's cape. First up, it's covered in star-like designs, but more importantly, there are 3 distinct circular patterns on it. Fans have speculated that this could represent the 3 Moon Sisters, and honestly, that theory makes a lot of sense. I can definitely see the connection. And here's something even crazier, Paimon's shoes. I only recently noticed this while working on this script, but her shoes actually look a lot like the divine nails that fell onto Dragonspine and the Chasm. I'm sure someone out there has already pointed this out, but it's a really neat little connection that ties Paimon to some of the biggest mysteries in Teyvat. So, just from appearance alone, there are a ton of visual clues that link Paimon to some of the most important elements in Genshin Impact. The 3 Moon Sisters, Celestia, and the world's deeper lore. So if you ask me whether Paimon's design hints at her having a huge role in the game story, I'd say absolutely. Her appearance isn't just random, it's practically screaming at us that she's connected to something big. But this is where the problem starts, when we actually look at Paimon's journey through Teyvat so far. Alright, so let's get this out of the way. In the 4.5 years I've played Genshin Impact, there have been exactly one instance where Paimon was even loosely associated with Celestia. And when I say one instance, I'm being very generous. This moment happens in the Melusine village during a side quest. There's an NPC named Canotila, a Melusine who claims that she can see things beyond what even normal Melusines can perceive. She takes one look at the traveler and describes them as a monster that looks like it could swallow the whole world in a single bite. But what does she say about Paimon? She calls her a rainbow balloon floating in the air, and notes that her string extends far, far above the sky itself. Then she drops a line that feels way too deliberate to ignore. The nature of things decide their future. Now obviously this is the developers themselves winking at us. They're flat out telling us that there is way more to Paimon than meets the eye. Which is great, fantastic, that's what we want, right? Except, this is the only time this ever happens. There is no other moment in the game where someone makes a comment like this about Paimon. No other comparison, no other clue that openly hints at her being linked to something bigger. And let's be real, Canotila isn't even an important character. She's not in the main story, she's not a companion that sticks with you throughout a quest, she's just an NPC that you bump into once, say hi, and probably forget about entirely. That alone speaks volume about how little the game actually pushes this revelation. So as I said before, this is the one instance, just one. And that brings us to the real discussion here, missed opportunities. Things that could have solidified Paimon's deeper connection to Celestia, but really never did. Alright, so before we dive into the discussion, let's establish something we can all agree on. Paimon is an ancient being. Whether you subscribe to the idea that Paimon is a moon sister or something else entirely, we can assume that she's very, very old. Maybe she used her powers to make herself younger, lost her memories, or did something to hide her past. But in the very least, she's connected to Celestia in some way. And if that's the case, then other ancient beings should be able to recognize her. Even if they don't know exactly who or what she is, they should at least sense something, an aura, a presence, or just a feeling that she's not normal. So if Paimon is truly important in the grand scheme of things, we should expect her presence to be acknowledged by others who are connected to Celestia. Now, let's talk about missed opportunities. There are 3 key missed opportunities regarding Paimon's lore, and we're going to start with the smallest but a very important one, her introduction to Zhongli. So Zhongli is the oldest Archon, clocking in at over 6,000 years old. That's a huge amount of time to gather knowledge, and we know that he's one of the wisest characters in all of Genshin Impact. He's got a wealth of knowledge, especially with his role as the god of contracts, meaning he's likely crossed paths with countless beings across Teyvat. Given all that, you think Zhongli, someone so ancient and so connected, would have some sense of Paimon's significance. Even if he didn't know her entire backstory, he'd at least question why someone like her exists, right? If she is truly as important as we suspect, her very existence should raise questions for someone like Zhongli. Now, I say this is one of these smaller missed opportunities because, well, there are a couple of reasons why Zhongli might not mention anything about her. First, maybe Paimon is actually older than Zhongli himself. Maybe she's been around for way longer than even he has, and she's simply done a good job hiding her true nature. Second, Zhongli could very well know about her and just isn't saying anything. We know that he's keeping secrets. He knows about the Traveler siblings, but due to a contract from way back, he's keeping that knowledge hidden. He's also aware of the Sarita's plan, but again, the contract keeps him from revealing too much. So maybe Paimon's connection is something Zhongli knows, but is just keeping it under wraps. So there is definitely room for arguments here. There are some very valid reasons why Paimon's backstory hasn't been revealed by Zhongli. So let's switch gears and talk about another major missed opportunity. Our introduction to Apep, the Dendro Dragon Sovereign, and why her lack of recognition of Paimon was a huge letdown. Apep is one of the oldest beings in Teyvat, and if we buy into the theory that Paimon is somehow tied to the Moon Sisters, and include the very strong implication that the Moon Sisters were killed during the Second War of Vengeance, then not only are we dealing with two ancient beings potentially linked to Celestia, but we are looking at two beings who in the very least have an idea of who the other is. Now, Apep has a serious grudge against the Heavenly Principles, making her the perfect character to recognize Paimon if she is in fact connected to Celestia. When we finally meet Apep in Nahida's second story quest, I expected some form of recognition, even if it was subtle, a glance, a change in her demeanor, anything that shows that she sensed something off about Paimon. But instead, nothing. Apep did not flinch, didn't give any indication that she knew what Paimon really was, or might represent, and this is where the missed opportunity lies. Apep has no contracts, no hidden agenda, and absolutely no reason to hold back. She directly opposes the Heavenly Principles. If Paimon is truly tied to Celestia in any way, Apep should have recognized her. The game did not give us a single moment of tension, or stare, or even a brief acknowledgement of her. The game had a golden opportunity here to hint at Paimon's deeper connection to the celestial powers and give us some real intrigue, but instead, we're left wondering why Apep, of all characters, didn't even bat an eye. She should have known, especially if Paimon's connection was strong enough to make waves. The lack of any recognition is a massive hole in Paimon's lore that could have added so much depth to her character, and here's the thing. If in the future we get a quest that places Paimon in a position of great importance, the game needs to do a good job explaining why Apep did not recognize her. This is a crucial piece that could be a glaring hole in the narrative. If Paimon is indeed connected to Celestia in any way, and Apep fought against Celestia's forces, why didn't she even vaguely recognize her? This is a detail that absolutely should be addressed. And if not, it leaves a huge question mark hanging over Paimon's importance moving forward. So yes, Apep not acknowledging Paimon was a missed opportunity, one that could have provided a clue or even a hint about Paimon's true nature. Instead, we're left with nothing, and that's a huge letdown considering how much potential this encounter had. Alright, let's dive into the third and final instance of these missed opportunities. Why didn't Ronova recognize Paimon? Especially if we're looking at Paimon as tied to Celestia or the Moon Sisters. We could make excuses for characters like Apep, given that she's an enemy of the Heavenly Principles, and maybe that could explain why she didn't show any recognition of Paimon. But let's pause for a second and think about Ronova, the Shade of Death. Someone who, honestly, might be the closest thing we've seen to a character who is completely aligned with the Heavenly Principles. I mean, we're talking about a character who, in terms of lore and positioning, is extremely close to Celestia's powers and its plans. And yet, when we meet her, not a single flicker of recognition or acknowledgement for Paimon, not even a glance. Now, let me be clear. If Paimon is tied to Celestia in any way, whether as one of the Moon Sisters or through some other connection, Ronova should have noticed her. She's someone who is actively working on behalf of the Heavenly Principles, someone whose very existence is tied to the Cosmic Order. So why didn't she recognize someone who potentially could be of utmost importance in the grand scheme of things? And this is where it becomes even more confusing. We've met some truly important figures in the game, all with various relationships with Celestia, the Heavenly Principles, and Teyvat's overarching lore, yet there is absolutely no character who even comes close to acknowledging that Paimon is someone important, except from maybe that one NPC who is barely significant in the grand scheme of things. And that to me is a huge issue. If we're truly going down the path where Paimon might be secretly connected to Celestia or the Moon Sisters, and we've been building up her importance over time, then why have there been no major recognition from the important characters we've met so far? It's as though the game is teasing us with this potential mystery about Paimon's true nature, but every time we meet someone who should be able to recognize her significance, like Ronova or Apep, there is just nothing. no recognition, no crew, no subtle hints, and honestly, it leaves us with more questions than answers. If Paimon is really this key figure tied to the Heavenly Principles, Celestial, or even the Moon Sisters, we would have expected the game to address this sooner, or at least plant some subtle clues in the interaction with these high-ranking characters. But at this point, the lack of acknowledgement from any important figures like Ronova, who should have at least sensed something about Paimon, feels like a missed opportunity to truly expand on the lore and create a real sense of intrigue around Paimon's potential significance. In short, it's frustrating because, for all we know, Paimon could be one of the most important characters in Teyvat, but the game has yet to provide us with any real hints about why this is, especially from characters who are supposed to have the knowledge to recognize it. This gap in recognition is something that definitely needs to be explained in the future, especially if Paimon's role becomes clearer down the road. Alright, so after all this, let's get a bit into theory crafting territory. If there is anything we know about Genshin Impact lore, we know that it finds a way to make a good amount of the inconsistencies make sense. So let's see if we can make sense of everything going on here. Paimon's importance isn't just a gut feeling, it's backed by some interesting pieces of lore. For one, we have the Melusine statement telling us directly that Paimon is crucial, and we know that the statement is important because she was right about the Traveler being capable of devouring huge concepts in the world like the Abyss. So where does that put Paimon? Could she be tied to something much larger than we even realize? Could her importance be connected to, let's say, the Descender, particularly the second Descender? Alright, so this is where things get a bit insane. So let's break it down a bit. We have some solid information about the first, third, and fourth Descender. The first Descender is the Heavenly Principles, which sets the foundation for the whole cosmic structure we see in Teyvat. The third Descender's remains was used to create the Gnosis, as we learned in Fontaine, meaning the third Descender is no longer alive. And the fourth Descender, of course, is the Traveler, the protagonist you control. So far, so good. But when it comes to the second Descender, there's virtually nothing. Not a single clue to their identity. Some people believe that Nibelung might be the second Descender, but I'm not sold on that theory. Every sovereign we've encountered is native to Teyvat, and the sovereigns were already active in Teyvat when the first Descender, the Heavenly Principles, arrived. If you take in the fact that Nibelung is the leader of the sovereigns, then that would greatly imply that Nibelung is likely a native to Teyvat, and not an outsider like other Descenders. This leaves us with no definitive clue about who the second Descender is. Now, how does this tie back into Paimon? Well, I have a theory, one that I find quite compelling, that Paimon could be linked to the second Descender, in a way that explains both her importance and why no one seems to recognize her. If Paimon is in fact connected to the second Descender, then it would make sense why she's so central to the story, yet so mysteriously overlooked by the major characters in Teyvat. Okay, so this theory could work in a couple of ways, and I think the most compelling route ties everything together through the mysterious power of the Irminsul. The Irminsul is a tree that contains all the information in Teyvat, and that being the case, it has a game-changing ability to erase memories, wipe out the existence of individuals or events from the collective consciousness of Teyvat. That's what we saw in the Sumeru quest, when the people forgot all about Rukkhadevata. To put simply, if Paimon was once active in a major way during the time of the second Descender, then perhaps she used the Irminsul to erase herself from everyone's memory. After all, Paimon's presence in the story screams importance, and there is no way around that. But no one recognizes her, not even the sovereigns or the powerful beings we've met in the game. Now here's where it gets interesting. If you consider the possibility that Paimon was involved with the second Descender, whoever that may be, it starts to make sense. If we take into account that the Traveler, the fourth Descender, came into Teyvat after Paimon's memory wipe, then the Traveler would only know Paimon for who she is right now in the present day, and would have no knowledge of her past. They would not know what she was doing, or how she might have been involved with the celestial events and powers. But what about everyone else? Let's take Apep for example. The Irminsul is capable of making people forget entire events, and it could very well be the reason why Apep does not recognize her. The same thing can be said about Ronova, who is incredibly close to Celestia. Ronova, as much as she's tied to the Heavenly Principles, is not a Descender. She's a Shade, and although it can be argued that Shades may be Descenders, remember, there are only 4 Descenders, and we know of 3 already. This would imply that although the Shades are created from the Heavenly Principle themselves, perhaps due to the fact that they were created within the confines of Teyvat, they are native to Teyvat. So while Ronova may be a powerful figure, she doesn't share the same connection to the Descenders that might explain why she would remember Paimon. It's a bit of a curveball, but it adds a layer of depth to the theory. Now here's where the theory gets even more interesting. What if Paimon's importance has always been linked to the second descender? Perhaps her role was so critical that she had to disappear to protect herself or the world. After all, the Traveler doesn't know about Paimon's history. They only know her as she is right now. So it makes sense that Paimon's past, tied to a powerful figure like the second descender, would be kept in the dark. This theory gives Paimon a deep, hidden connection to the story. She's not just a companion, she might be a key player, one whose memories were wiped to prevent something catastrophic. Maybe the second descender is still out there, and Paimon's connection to them will be revealed in time. So what do you think? Do you agree that the game has done a lousy job at showing Paimon's importance, or do you believe otherwise? Does this theory hold water, or do you have your own take on why Paimon remains such a mysterious figure, despite being so important? Or do you believe that Paimon is not just important in the game? Let me know your thoughts, and as always, I'll catch you in the next one.